Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching the video for Lab 2 of Active Directory in Server 2003. In this video, we're going to take a close-up look at organizational units and see how we can use these to subdivide our domain into several different parts. We'll also look at how we can move objects back and forth within the organizational units, and then take a look at permission delegation to see how we can assign a subset of administrative privileges to different users. Let's get started by taking a quick look at what organizational units are all about. Now, first off, they are new to Windows 2000 and Server 2003, and this makes a huge difference when it comes to managing the number of domains you have in your organization. Smaller organizations usually have just one domain, whether it was an NT4, 2000, or 2003, but when companies start to grow a little bit, even having a different branch office sometimes resulted in multiple domains in NT 4.0. Now in 2000 and 2003, one of the main themes is domain and server consolidation, trying to reduce the number of servers and the number of domains to save on both hardware and administrative costs. Okay, and this is one thing that organizational units really let us do, and that is really put them in place of creating multiple domains in an organization. Now we'll take a look at why this is and how this is here in a second, but essentially we can use OUs because we can now assign permissions to different people in order to manage different parts of our domain. Whereas in NT 4.0, we were stuck a lot of times having to create multiple domains if we had different administrative needs, let's say between our two branch offices in North Carolina and San Francisco. Okay, another thing they are a container object that gives you more granular control over your environment. It was pretty difficult in NT4 to manage this environment. A lot of times you had to come up with settings that kind of affected the entire domain. While in Windows 2000 and now 2003, OUs allow us to subdivide our environment up and then come up with granular permission assignments, desktop restrictions, software, all sorts of different things we can do through something called group policy. Let's focus on our main purposes of organizational units here. Okay, our main purposes of organizational units. First, we have delegation of authority, and this is kind of what we were talking about before, and this is something that we will demonstrate within this lab today. And when we say delegation of authority, what we're trying to do here is give some sort of junior admin or maybe even a power user in a department. So let's just pick out a department such as accounting. We have some user there where we'd like to just give them a small subset of administrative privileges, such as resetting passwords or creating new users, something along those lines. Okay, well this wizard, or we can even get more advanced and go into the permissions themselves, allow us to set these permissions in a way where we can do that without making this person a full-blown administrator. Nowhere even close to that. So this is a great new feature in 2000 and 2003. Another reason, and this is probably used more frequently, is assigning group policy. Group policy to me is probably the biggest new feature in 2000 and 2003. Makes things much, much simpler when you're managing your environment. And we're going to focus a lot on group policy in the next lab, Lab 3, but group policy lets us do things like deploy software out to users, restrict desktops, run login scripts, all sorts of different things. In 2000, there's something like 500 plus different policies we can set, and in Server 2003 and XP, it's closer to 1,000. So there's just a ton of policies that we can set and control our environment from one centralized location, which is the key. Okay, then our last reason here for using OUs, quite simply just organization. You're going to see here in a second when we look at these, maybe you have 30 users in your domain and you just want to break them down and make it easier to organize them. Well, you can do it that way if you want to. You might not be using either of these two above options, and some people strictly use group policy or organizational units for organization. Now, general rules before we get started. This applies a lot of time, anytime we're creating anything within Active Directory, but especially when we're dealing with OUs. Rule number one is keep it simple. Okay, we really want to keep it simple. Don't try to build this amazing organizational unit structure when just a simple OU structure would really suit our needs. Okay, and this kind of goes hand in hand with rule number two, plan your work before you work your plan. Okay, we've got to plan our work first, and this means, putting pencil to paper and really figuring out exactly what we want and how we want to do this. Okay, and general rule number 3 here this also fits into the first two, kind of gives us a clue as to where to start. Okay, delegation of permissions or delegation of authority, however we want to phrase it, has to be our first priority. Okay, and the reason is because this particular piece up here, one of the main purposes that we discussed above as well, we can only control this through the organizational units, okay, and domains. There's no other way besides this one delegation wizard and the permissions that we can set. There's no other way of controlling this, okay? Whereas with group policy, we can actually affect group policy. We can get a little bit more advanced, and we can use something called group policy filtering to set our group policies. We don't necessarily have to do it based upon our organizational unit structure. Okay, we'll see that. We'll take a look at that. But so what this boils down to is if you have a delegation of permissions needs where you want to delegate permissions down to another user, you need to create your organizational unit structure in a way that will fit this need. Okay, so we'll have to actually set it up so that user is able then to manage that small group of, let's say it was the marketing users, or this group of 10 people, whatever it might be. We're going to have to set up our OUs in order to take care of this need. Okay, we'll show that here in a second. Next, let's take a look at what our focus is here on the benandbrady.com domain. And this is what we have so far. We've got one domain named Ben and Brady. Okay, and then here we've got two different domain controllers that are actually replicating information back and forth. Now what we're going to do in this particular lab is create two additional sub-OUs right underneath the domain for California and for North Carolina. And this is representative of our branch offices in California and North Carolina. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, we should really start talking, why are we doing this? Because just because we have branch offices in California and North Carolina doesn't necessarily mean that we have to create organizational units for those particular branch offices. Okay, and this is going back to the previous point where we need to plan our work first and decide why we're doing this. Okay, there's no reason to do it if there's no delegation or group policy needs. So what our plan really is, as the administrator in San Francisco, you're acting as the administrator of this company, and you're located in California. Okay, and you're already real busy, and what we want to do eventually is actually delegate administrative privileges to somebody in the North Carolina location. So that's why we're creating two OUs as a starting point, okay, a California and a North Carolina OU. You'll be the administrator of the entire domain. Well, you'll delegate permission down to somebody so they're actually able to run the North Carolina office, and permission will be delegated to this user right at this level, right at the North Carolina OU, which we will do later on in this lab. Underneath here, we have come up with three different departments in both California and North Carolina, and these pattern each other: marketing, accounting, and sales. Do bear in mind, this doesn't necessarily have to pattern each other. Maybe we don't have a sales department in California, but we do have a research and development department. So you might create an OU for that particular department. So just keep that in the back of your mind. It doesn't really have to be set up this way, where it's the exact same settings in both California and North Carolina. Now, if we created these OUs, there must be some purpose as to why we created them. Okay, otherwise, we could just lump our, let's say we have 50 users in both of these locations. We could put 50 users inside California with no other sub-OUs, and 50 users inside North Carolina with no other sub-OUs. Okay, and that would be how we would do it if there were no other permission delegations, no other group policies that we were going to set, that differentiated these people, or we just, we didn't really care about organization. 50 people really isn't that much to go through here, so organization probably wouldn't come into play. Let's go back to the group policy situation, though, just to give you a feel for why we actually might create these, sub-OUs here. So we created these parent OUs, and the reason we did this was because we needed to delegate permissions down to an additional user over here. Okay, so we're going to have like a junior admin working in North Carolina. These sub-OUs, though, the reason we created these for the benandbrady.com domain is because we have different needs for these departments. Okay, the marketing department, they may need a certain piece of software such as some sort of Microsoft Office application that maybe the sales department doesn't have a need for. Okay, maybe marketing and accounting need to access Microsoft Access, whereas the sales department doesn't. They may have a different need. They need to use the software Semantic Act contact management software. Okay, or we have additional restrictions. Maybe we don't want the salespeople on the internet, so we restrict the internet from the salespeople. What you need to do ahead of time, though, before you even create this OU structure, would be to determine what those needs are. Because if everybody here, if there's no different desktop restrictions and everybody here is using the same software, don't build this structure. There's no reason to make it more complex. Okay, we're going to get started now and actually start going through this. And the first thing we're going to do is open up server 1. So we're going to connect over using a remote desktop connection. Okay, and here once again you can provide the IP address or the NetBIOS name as you saw there. That was just server 1 that I provided. And now I'm going to log onto server 1 with the password. When we're here, the first thing we're going to do is work on the creation of organizational units within our Active Directory Users and Computers tool. Okay, so that's done by going to Start, All Programs, Administrative Tools, and then Active Directory Users and Computers. And once you learn how to do this, this first part is really fairly straightforward. So we'll go through it pretty quickly. It's just really more a matter of placement than anything else. So before we do create those OUs, let's spend a little bit of time and talk about what we currently have. What is this structure that we see right here? Because we have, a domain, and that's what this object is here. This represents the domain object, benandbrady.com. And then we have several other folders. Okay, and this one has a little like phone book or directory on it. So let's differentiate right now so we're all comfortable with what we see here. Well, we have all these folders without anything on them that I'm clicking through right now. These are just general container objects. Okay, and a container object is a very general term. Anything in Active Directory, like we look here, this is a domain, but a more general term for it would be a container object. Everything we see here is technically a container object. Okay, well, more specifically though, this is a domain, and this one here is an organizational unit. And we can differentiate this and tell this because there's a phone book, this little symbol, on this folder here. The rest of these are just real general containers. They don't do anything except hold stuff. Okay, and this one here says computers, then we have users, foreign security principles, and then our built-in container that contains a bunch of different groups. Okay, so that's the first thing. Don't get so caught up in the term container. If that's confusing you, relate this to real life. If I say a container, well, what's that relating to? It could be a garbage can. Okay, it could be a Tupperware container. There's all sorts of different containers, and that's what we're dealing with here. Okay. Now, first thing we'll focus then on is this computers container and this users container. A lot of new students feel that they, are obligated to create users within the users container and the computers within the computers container, and rightfully so. That's how they're named. These, however, are really just default locations or temporary locations to store your users and your computers. Right now, you see that I do have XP1, our Windows XP client, within this container. Eventually, however, we do want to move this over into a normal organizational unit. And I'll tell you why. When we get into group policy in our next lab, you'll see that when it comes to containers, I can't set group policy here. I'll just give you a little bit of a preview. If I go down to properties, there is no group policy tab here. I can't do anything else with it. Whereas if I right-click on this organizational unit and go to properties, I see that I have a group policy tab, which allows me to control settings, software, like we discussed before. So if all my users were just thrown inside this users container, all the people in accounting and marketing and sales, so on and so forth, I'd have no way of differentiating what desktop restrictions or what software any of these particular users get. Okay, so what's the purpose of these then? Well, we need some, place to put all these users, and this is especially useful when we're migrating from other operating systems. If you're doing a migration from a different domain where you're migrating users or computers into this domain, if you're migrating from NT4 or from even a different operating system such as Novell, we need some default location. And this is indeed where users are placed and computers are placed. They're all just kind of thrown into these containers as the default location. Okay, so what we're going to do now, let's actually create an OU structure. Okay, and this is going to pattern exactly what we just saw here a second ago. And just as a reminder, okay, this is what we're creating. We're going to create OUs for California and North Carolina. These will be directly under the domain. Then after that, we're going to create sub-OUs, and these sub-OUs then will exist underneath the respective parent containers. Okay, so we'll start off here. To create an OU underneath the domain, we need to right-click just go down to New, and then Organizational Unit. Okay, and you're probably better off using something that's descriptive, but also not completely long-winded. So if I typed out San Francisco here, that would really make this name longer and longer and longer. So we're just going to use CA or SF if you want to do for San Francisco. That's technically where the company's located. I'm just going to put in CA for California to stick with the example. Okay, and you see that we have that there. Then we'll create another one for North Carolina. I click OK, and now you see that we have two different organizational units here. Okay, well, now we can create another organizational unit within California, and that's to represent those child OUs that we were looking at before. We're going to create one for accounting, another one for sales, and then lastly one for marketing. What am I doing? New OU. Okay, so now you see that we have the domain, child OU of the domain, and then children OU of this, organizational unit here. Okay, so that we do have. If you select these, if you wanted to move this, let's say you didn't want this located here, we could move it, we can cut and paste. We're new to Server 2003. We couldn't do this in Windows 2000. We can actually drag and drop, which is kind of cool. So I can, maybe I made a mistake and this accounting OU is supposed to be down here. I can drag and drop it down to North Carolina. Okay, and now if we click North Carolina, we see that we have the accounting OU located there. Okay, so let's put it back up here again. So I drop it into California. And now what we need to do is create these exact same OUs here, so it's really just the same process. So we'll do this quickly here. This is definitely something that on your own you want to be practicing. Okay, you don't have to limit yourself to the organizational units that you see here. Come up with some sort of structure that's even more complex. The best way of learning this stuff is to actually practice it, do it, and then test out the policies. Anybody can do this. Okay, so I'm not telling you to create 27 different organizational units. Anybody can do that. You're just typing stuff out, clicking, that sort of thing. Actually start experimenting with placing users in OUs and setting policies and delegating permission and seeing that it works and it doesn't work. Try to set up a realistic scenario that would really happen in a company, like we're going to go through here in a second, and then see if that actual scenario works. Okay, next thing we're going to do then is create a new user, and we're going to do this within our California accounting OU, and this user account is our Jill Smith user account. Okay, and notice if I want to create a user in this OU, I need to select it, then right-click and go to New User. If I create a user up here, it's really no problem. After I create the user, though, I then have to drag it and drop it, okay, over here into California accounting. Well, we'll save a step, and we'll do it right within this actual OU. Okay, and I'm just using the exact same users that we have used in the previous exercise, so you'll see that here. Okay, in 2003, you are required to put in a password, and you always should. The only reason I wouldn't, we're in this test environment here, so sometimes we won't enter that, but we are required to in Server 2003. Okay, now you see that we have the user account Jill Smith. Fairly straightforward. It's not really a huge deal. What I'm going to do now, I've got to create a series of other users. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, but before I do so, I'm going to pause the video, create these users offline, and when I come back online again, I'll show you kind of exactly where we stand, and we'll continue on right from there. Okay, I've got my users created now, so we'll go through just briefly here just to show you what's going on. No big deal. I've got a couple users, one or two users in each of the different organizational units as we're clicking through here. Okay, just to make our example a little bit easier to follow. Now, keep in mind, if we had this few users in our company, I mean, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and a couple more, 10 users, it's not very likely that we'd have this many organizational units. That's kind of overkill. It's just not going to really be that beneficial. So we probably have, in this particular case, we might have 50, 100, 150 users or so for an OU structure of this size. Let's demonstrate how we can move our different users between the different OUs. Okay, and in Windows 2000 this is a little bit more difficult. Fairly straightforward though in Server 2003. We really have two choices. Okay, we can either right click and then click move, and this is exactly how we did it in 2000. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just put him in accounting. Or even easier now, drag and drop like I've shown you before. So I pick up this user account and I just drag him to the exact location where I want to place him. Okay, and we also have two additional users that we created before, Ben Smith and Brady Jones. We're going to move Ben over to North Carolina Marketing. Okay, and then Brady Jones are going to move over to the California Marketing Department. Okay, and I don't think we have any other users here. We do have this administrator account. You can locate this into an organizational unit. The one thing you do have to be careful of, if you put it into an OU anywhere over here, just have to make sure that the restrictions you set aren't necessarily going to affect that administrator in an adverse way. Okay, let me give you an example. Let's say that here's the administrator account that we use as the administrator in California. So I'm not going to put it in sales, marketing, or accounting. I'm just going to put it at the top level OU here. Okay, well, I may forget about it, and I may set up some policy that, let's say, restricts My Network Places or restricts access to the control panel icon, something that's there to keep the users from accessing stuff that they don't need to be messing with. Well, when you set a setting up like that, unless you change the default way it's set up, it is going to affect any user that exists within that OU or the domain if you set it there. And the administrator does exist within the California OU. Okay, not within any of these sub-OUs, but the user account itself exists right underneath, the root of that OU. Okay, so what would you do to affect it? Well, it's a couple things. One thing you could do is not place the user there, like we had before, so I just leave this, admin there. I could even create a special OU if I wanted to. I could create an OU called admins. Okay, and notice now that it's not part of California or North Carolina, but it indeed exists on its own. Okay, or there's another thing called group policy filtering. We're going to cover that in Lab 3. It's another way of making sure that certain policies don't affect administrators that you don't want to affect them. Okay, so like I said, we'll cover that, but just some options for right now. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is delegate permission like we were speaking of before. And the general scenario is this right now. We're working in California, we're super busy, and there's all sorts of user issues in North Carolina. We've hired new people, new user accounts have to be created, group structures are actually still kind of changing, and you don't want to deal with it, resetting passwords and all that garbage. So what you're going to do for right now is you're going to give a user in North Carolina access to modify these settings, create new users, create groups, reset passwords, just for the time being. And eventually, what you'd like to have done is have a junior admin come in there and actually manage the North Carolina office, like we discussed before. Okay, so let's talk about how we can do that. And just to give you a feel for what we're going to do, there is a user account that we're going to use, Peter Ramirez. This particular user has just been chosen. Maybe they're interested in computers. They're a manager there. They're kind of one of those computer tweaker people who don't necessarily work in the IT department, but they know a decent amount about computers and they're interested in doing stuff. Well, that's kind of the ideal candidate for the person who's going to be in charge of resetting passwords or just general, computing stuff. And they really can't do too much damage, which is the good news, especially now that we have this delegation wizard that we're going to go over right now. Okay, so to do this, first thing we have to do is actually delegate permissions to Pete Ramirez. Okay, so what we're going to do, we don't want to allow Pete Ramirez to manage the entire domain or the California OU, only North Carolina. So to do this, we need to select North Carolina and then right-click on it. Okay, and then up top we see Delegate Control. So we click this, and this takes us to the Delegation Control Wizard. Clicking Next then allows us to select the user or a group of users you can even select. Okay, now we have the chance to actually type in his name. And I'm just going to type in Pete. Let's see what comes up here. Okay, Peter Ramirez pops up. And I click OK. Peter Ramirez is added to the users and groups. Okay, and now we get into the real fun where we can actually take a look at what we can delegate down to this person. Okay, and down to right here is exactly the same thing as we saw in Windows 2000 down to here. And we do have some new things in Server 2003. These are kind of cool. Generate resultant set of policies, planning and logging. This is a feature we're going to talk about more in Lab 3. These last three really aren't something you'll be messing with much. The inet org person, this is a new schema object class object in Server 2003, and it's really for interactivity with the Sun Solera, or Sun microsystems, their directory service with their operating system. So this is really something, it's very doubtful you'll be messing with this, but you do have the ability, if you needed to give somebody the ability to modify that account. So we'll focus in on our top ones, and in specific, what we want to allow Peter Ramirez to do is create, delete, and manage user accounts. Okay, so he can create user accounts, he can delete user accounts, and he can manage them, which would mean what? Well, change information, change the account information, change general information on that user, reset user passwords, and force password change at next logon options. Okay, how about reading all user information? It's up to you. It kind of depends. Do you want them to know the home address, anything that you can populate with an Active Directory? Peter Ramirez will have access to if you select this box. Create, delete, and manage groups. Okay, do you want this to happen? Well, we talked about that, and it is something that we will allow Peter to do, and then modify the membership of a group. Okay, and we'll go ahead and select that as well. Pardon me, as well. Now, group policy isn't something we want Peter Ramirez messing with. In this case, it all depends. You may have somebody that you do trust. Maybe a junior admin is quite capable of managing group policy. That's kind of up to you, and it depends upon the situation. For our example right now, we'll stop right here at these permissions, and we'll click Next, and that brings us then to the end of our wizard, where we can just click Finish. Okay, and now Peter Ramirez has been assigned these permissions. Now, just to give you a feel for what's actually happened behind the scenes, this greatly simplified the process of assigning security permissions. Okay, and I'll show you here. First things first, we want to go take a look at our actual security permissions, and if we do that, what we can do is just right-click, then go to Properties, and you're looking for a security tab up top here. Now, you don't see it right now, and that's by design. Okay, they don't want you messing with this unless you know what's going on. So to show this security tab, what you need to do is go up top to View, then click Advanced Features. Okay, and you see that it shows a whole heck of a lot more of container objects here as well. We now have this foreign security principles, NTDS quotas, program data. These weren't here before. Okay, we're going to go back over to our North Carolina OU properties. Okay, and now we do have a security tab. This is what we were speaking of just a second ago. What this security tab is, this is representative of what security permissions people have for this particular Active Directory object. Okay, and I selected North Carolina, and you can see right here, here's the North Carolina properties. And when we look here, these are all the default permissions that have been set. Okay, and if we scroll down though, we see that Peter Ramirez also has permissions that have been set. Okay, and you don't see anything down below. That's because he has special permissions. And we'll have to take a look at these more here in a second, but just to give you a feel for what's going on, let's look at these. And you see here, Peter Ramirez has these special permissions that allow him to do the things that we had specified previously. Now, we'll come back to this and put a little bit more time into this, trying to understand what's going on here. But for right now, let's actually test this out and get it to work before we do anything else. Okay, so this is step one, is to actually delegate permission to Peter Ramirez. Step two, we got to make this work. I mean, if Peter Ramirez can't access Active Directory, then there's no way that he can actually manage the user accounts. So what we're going to do now is we're going to enable Peter Ramirez's system. Okay, we're going to actually set up the Active Directory console on his system and give him the permissions to use this console. And to do that, what we have to do is make him an administrator of his own computer. Okay, and Peter Ramirez is working at our XP1 system that we have in this lab. That'll be his kind of test system, the system that he sits down at. So what we need to do here, okay, and this is kind of critical that you get a feel for this, we are not making him an administrator of the domain. We're going to make him an administrator of his own system, okay, which is named XP1 or something along those lines. To do so, I'm just going to minimize Active Directory right now. We're going to form a Microsoft Management Council. Okay, I'm going to run MMC. Okay, add remove snap-in. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect over to the XP Machine's local users and groups tool. Okay, the local users and groups tool. Now I could do this right from the XP Machine itself, meaning I could walk over to the XP Machine, or in my case just minimize it. We're at the XP Machine right here. Okay, but I'm going to show you how to do this remotely across the network. What we're going to do here then is add this local users and groups snap-in. I just double clicked it, and I'm not working on the local computer, I'm working on another computer. Okay, in this system I don't know the exact name, so I just click XP here, and click check names, and it should reveal some system with XP in it, probably XP1 or XP Pro, something along those lines. Okay, XP1 is what it found. Then I click OK, and then finish. Now I need to close this, indicating that I have no more snap-ins that I want to manage, and I click OK one more time, and finally I'm back then to my local tool right here. And now what I'm doing here, I'm still sitting, if you're kind of confused as to where we are, I'm still sitting on server 1. This is our domain controller. What I've done is just opened up this little management console and connected over to the XP Machine. I'm actually looking at the users and groups that are part of that local database. Okay, here you see they just have administrator and guest, and then groups, just the typical groups that you would see on a XP Pro machine. I'm going to open up administrators, and what I'm going to do here is give Peter Ramirez administrative access just to the local system. Okay, I do this by searching for his name from the Ben and Brady location. Okay, and I see that it has come up here, P. Ramirez. So I'm giving Peter Ramirez, plain old ordinary user from the benandbrady.com domain, administrative privilege to his local system. Okay, and that's all I have to do to actually enable that. So that is accomplished. So now I'm going to close this console, and I'm not going to be using this console again, so I'm not going to save the settings. But if you wanted to save it, if you had to manage this XP system over and over and over again, you could save it so you didn't have to go through the same process we just did a second ago. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to create a directory on my C drive. Okay, and I'm going to name this directory, okay, Management Tools. Okay, Management Tools. So I just name it Management Tools, and the next thing I'm going to do is share it. Okay, in a second here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to put some management tools inside this directory so it's shared. Then Peter Ramirez will be able to access these tools from his XP machine, so we'll be able to get them off of this server. Now, two things we have to build. One thing we have to build, one thing we have to copy from the CD. We need to get the adminpack.msi file off of the Server 2003 CD. If you're not familiar with this tool, this is the admin pack allows an administrator or a junior admin in this case to manage the network, manage a domain, manage anything within the domain from an XP machine or from a Windows 2000 machine. Okay, so you want to work with an Active Directory, or you want to work on the disk management tool within the disk management tool, you can be sitting at your XP machine and connect to Active Directory by using this admin pack tool. We'll demonstrate this here in a second. First things first, what we need to do is copy this tool from the Server 2003 CD. So the CD should already be in my CD-ROM drive. Let's see here. It is. We have an evaluation copy of Server 2003. So I'm going to open this up, and we're going to browse here. And what I'm looking at is first in the i3d6 folder, and then down for a file named adminpack.msi. So I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit. It's alphabetical, so it should be coming up quickly. Okay, and here it is, adminpack.msi. I'm going to copy this tool back over to my C drive into this Management Tools folder. Okay, so I'm pasting that here. Okay, and the next thing we need to do, we need to create an Active Directory console for Peter Ramirez to use. Because keep in mind, he's not going to have access to all these different tools. He's not going to be able to use everything. So what I want to do, I want to make it really simple for him. So when he opens up his little toolbox, he doesn't have to worry about anything else, but he just manages Active Directory. So it'll be fairly straightforward. To do this, I'm going to go back to MMC once again, and we're going to build him this Active Directory console. Add remove snap-in. Okay, and then Active Directory users and computers. That's the tool he'll be using. Okay, so then I click close. Okay. And one more thing we want to do before we close this, and that is to save this console in user mode. We do this by going down to options. Okay, and take this off of author mode, which allows people to make changes to it, and change it to user mode full access, which will allow him to use this tool in its entirety without changing the actual console that we created for him. Okay, I'm going to save this as AD tool, Active Directory tool, and I'm going to save it inside that directory that we created before, management tools. Okay, so AD tool, saving it inside management tools. I just click save, and now I can close this. We're all set and done with this. Okay, so we're back to our desktop. We're sitting here right now, and we're really done on this particular machine for the time being. So what we're going to do, let's just go ahead and close out the Active Directory so we have nothing open. And we're going to log off this session as well. Okay, and the next thing we're going to have to do is log off this system, and we're going to log right back onto this XP system as Peter Ramirez. So it's in effect going to be like Peter Ramirez is sitting at his own desktop, and then when Peter Ramirez logs on, we want to check and see if everything works like it should. Can he open the Active Directory management tool? Can he create users within the OU? So we'll kind of go through that here in a second. So I'm going to stop the video so I can log off this system, and I'll log back on and start the video right back up. Okay, we've logged on to the XP1 machine as Peter Ramirez right now, so we're ready to test this out and see what's going to happen here. Now, remember, Peter Ramirez is a local administrator here on this XP machine, so he can do anything he wants here locally. So this is kind of important to realize. So let me just demonstrate this to you. First off, and what we're going to do is go into the local users and computers tool on this XP machine. Okay, so here it is. I open this up, and notice that there's no Peter Ramirez account here, but if we go to groups and then open up administrators, this is where we see the Peter Ramirez account sitting right here. Okay, so this is a Ben and Brady domain account, but it's been placed here locally inside the administrators group. And that's what gives this user administrative access here locally. So Peter Ramirez could create users here locally and do anything he wants on this local system. Now, next thing we'll do is connect over to server 1, and we're going to use a UNC path, // you can use a NetBIOS name or an IP address here. So we'll just make it simple and type in server 1, and when we put in the / here, we should see the different shares that pop up here, and the one that we shared was management tools. So we'll select management tools, hit enter. Okay, and then we see the two different things that we had copied over to this directory show up here. So let's just make this easy. We'll copy and then paste these onto our desktop. Okay, so these two tools now exist here locally, and let's focus on what they actually do. Okay, first and foremost, this AD tool here, this tool is the Microsoft Management Console, kind of the toolbox that the domain administrator created for Peter Ramirez. With this tool, Peter Ramirez can open this up and actually manage the Active Directory users and computers. However, if he opens this tool up, if he attempts to open it right now, we get an error message here telling us the snap-in failed to initialize. And the reason for this, well, the capabilities of running Active Directory, like we see right here, they just don't work. Okay, it says snap-in creation failed. We don't have the capability of installing this program on the local system. That's why we have to use this adminpack.msi tool. What this tool does is actually takes our administrative tools. Come on. Okay, when we come in here, there is no administrative tools by default in XP. So to get these enabled, right-click the taskbar, Properties, Start Menu, Customize, okay, Advanced, and I'm going to go down to Administrative Tools, which I believe is at the bottom. I'm going to have these displayed on the All Programs menu and the Start menu. So now when I click OK and OK a second time, we should see our administrative tools pop up here. Okay, here they are right here, Administrative Tools. Now take a look at the number of administrative tools we have. Since this is just an XP machine that we're working with, we only have a limited number of tools, 7 different tools here that we see. Local security policy, event viewer, so on and so forth. What adminpack.msi does, when we install this, we'll go ahead and do this as we're talking, it allows us to access all the different tools that you would find on a domain controller. Basically, any tool that's within the entire toolbox in Active Directory. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that once I have the tool here that everything is going to work. For example, there's going to be an icon for DHCP and an icon for DNS. Well, if I attempted to open those up as a normal user, they're not going to work because this user that we're using, Peter Ramirez, he doesn't have the capability of running DNS or DHCP. Okay? And same thing applies even on a domain controller. You may see icons for all these different tools. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to work. You have to have the program installed. For example, DHCP is a good example. You see the icon for DHCP. You assume that it's installed in the system, but when you click it, it actually doesn't open anything up. You get an error message because you haven't installed DHCP through your add removes programs location. Okay, so kind of a long-winded answer. We're going to focus on what we want to do here first and foremost. Okay, so when this finishes up here and it's just about done, what we'll first do is take a look at our administrative tools and see how it's changed since we just looked at it a second ago. And you should see, several more tools within that area. And as a matter of fact, I'll demonstrate to you when we get there what I was talking about before, where you see all these different tools, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to work properly when you indeed click on them. Okay, this is taking forever now. Usually doesn't take very long to install at all. This seems like it's taking longer than it normally does. So, okay. Now what we'll do, let's go first up to Administrative Tools. So I clicked All Programs, Administrative Tools. Now look at all the different administrative tools that we have. All of these, the kind of the darker yellow color, these are all new tools as far as stuff that was not there before. Okay, and one of them that's key to us is Active Directory users and computers. Let's pick something out though. Let's use DHCP. You may see this tool here and go, oh cool, now I can manage DHCP. When you click it though, you really have to be able to connect over to something, and if there's no DHCP service to manage, there's really nothing here. Okay, so I can't do anything. If I try to add a server, I can try to add in even, let's try adding in server 1. Okay, so I take this name, I click OK. I'm just a normal user. Okay, I try to connect here and I can't even connect to this DHCP server. So long story short, just because you see the icon there doesn't necessarily mean that you can work with this particular tool. Okay, now, that's why we created this Active Directory tool then for this user account Peter Ramirez. So you're the administrator, he's your junior admin or temporary admin, and you created this tool for him. This is all you really want him to mess with. You don't want him going in here and, taking a look at this. He's not going to be able to do anything, but, don't even waste your time going through this stuff. So Peter Ramirez can double-click this Active Directory tool now, and this should open up the Active Directory for benandbrady.com. Okay, he is able to access this, and now if we look through here, Peter Ramirez can open up, California. He sees Christina Sanchez. He can read all the information in here. There's no problem with that. Other users can also read this information to a limited degree. With the North Carolina OU, this is the OU that Peter actually had delegated to him. So if we come here, Peter Ramirez can actually create a new user account. Let's go ahead and create a new user account here and test this out. We'll create a user account named Sue Smith, just to see if this actually works. Okay, boom, without a hitch. Okay, so we created Sue Smith. We can reset our password. That's another thing that he was given permission to do. Okay, so we could set the password. It's going to have to comply to the complexity requirements that are part of this domain. But we can reset it. Okay, he can create a group. Okay, if I right-click here, we go to New. We've got Group as an option. This can be done anywhere within the North Carolina OU. However, if Peter wanted to create a user account for somebody in California, let's say in the accounting OU, he right-clicks. There is no New. Remember down here when we right-click, we've got New, Group or User. Okay, and that's right above all tasks. Take a look now when we go back up to California. I right click, here's all tasks. There is no new. Okay, so I can't do that. If I attempt to do anything within this OU, let's say that Peter Ramirez sees delegate control. I'm going to delegate control, I think, to another user. No, he doesn't have permissions to do that. Okay, he can look at this user account and maybe he doesn't want Jill Smith to exist anymore, so he deletes the user account. Nope, he doesn't have sufficient privileges to do that. So at this point right now, Peter Ramirez has really read-only information on the California OU, and if you look at it, he also has limited information as to what he can see as well. Okay, he'll be able to see more information and change information amongst users here in the North Carolina OU. He can actually go in here and change any of this information on Bob Hayes, okay, or any other user here in North Carolina. Okay, now we're going to have to log off here. What we're going to do is log back on as the administrator, and we're going to take a look at how we can remove delegation before we finish up with this lab. Okay, we're logged back on to the XP machine as the administrator, and what we'll do now is connect back over to a domain controller. So we'll use a remote desktop connection and connect over to server 1, one of our domain controllers. And now we're going to take a look at, I guess a closer look at the permissions, and then also how we can remove delegation. Let's say that we no longer want it. In our scenario, basically, Peter Ramirez was just kind of a temporary fix, and once we actually hired our true junior administrator, we want to remove the permissions from Peter Ramirez's account. So now that we're over here on the domain controller, first things first, we have to go back into Active Directory users and computers. Okay, once this is open up, then what we'll do is we're going to right-click on the organizational unit where this is set, go to Properties, and before we do this, remember, this security tab that's going to show up right here, this is not going to be present by default. So if you want to see the security tab, you're going to have to go up to, it's locked up here a second, let's give it a chance to catch up. You have to go up here to View Advanced Features. Right now I'm going to deselect this, and you'll see a lot of these advanced features kind of disappear, including that security tab. If I select Advanced Features and then go into North Carolina, I'll see that that security tab actually shows up. Okay, so then once this shows up here, what we're looking at first and foremost, well, if we look down here, we do see that Peter Ramirez has what's called an access control entry, ACE, access control entry. That just means that he has an entry on this particular object, and he has permissions related to it. Okay, and this whole thing, by the way, is called an access control list, ACL or ACL, you'll sometimes hear it called. So this whole list collectively is the ACL, access control list, and each entry then is an access control entry. Okay, so this access control entry here, Peter Ramirez, we see that there are no permissions specified here. No allows, no denies. Well, if we look down below, there are special permissions, which basically means there's advanced settings. It doesn't fit neatly into the predefined normal permissions. So if we click advanced here, we'll see that Peter Ramirez actually has several different special permissions that have been set. And let's take a look at a couple of these. Let's look at full control of user objects. If I select this and then click edit, you see some of the things that Peter Ramirez is allowed to do. And here's the advanced or special permissions. Peter Ramirez can delete subtrees, write properties, okay, create child objects, change passwords, reset passwords. These are the types of things that you can get in here and get real granular with when it comes time to actually set permissions. And this gets pretty complex. If we change the Apply Onto drop-down box here, look at all the different things that we can select here. So there's just a ton of different things we can select. And each one of these, for example, let's just pick one out here, printer objects, for example. Each one has a different list of permissions. Okay, so we see that he has full control of all the different printer object permissions. How about trusted domain objects? Well, he has full control of all those as well. If we start going through these, there will be some, of course, that he does not have any permissions to. Okay, group objects, he should have full permissions for all of those, and he does. Okay, so this is where the permissions are set, and as you can see, I told you before, it gets real complex. I mean, he's got 5 different settings here, or 4 different settings here, to make up this one permission that we set before. Okay, and you'll see the same thing. If you open up any of these, it's pretty much the same thing. Now this is kind of interesting here. He only has permissions to this one or two entries down here, to the ability to create and delete user objects. He can't do anything with result instead of policy, shared folder objects, printer objects, okay, and a bunch of other stuff here that doesn't necessarily make any sense to us right now. So this is very, very complex though, but the nice thing about it is you can research this, which is exactly how you would modify these settings. Find something that you're trying to do, you can research it, find the appropriate setting, you can access it within Active Directory, through these properties right here, and then give permissions to it if you indeed want to allow permissions to that particular setting. Okay? Now, to remove delegation, meaning we no longer want Peter Ramirez to do anything, well, of course he can access his files and all that stuff, but we don't want him creating users or resetting passwords anymore. Well, I just need to remove these permissions. There's no undelegate wizard to take away those permissions. You're going to have to go in here and remove these. So we can do this one by one, okay, or we can select them here multiply like I just did, and then click remove. And by the way I did this, I'm holding down the control key, or you can hold down the shift key and just select the whole group at once. So this is selected, now I push shift, left click, it selects the whole range of entries here. And this is the same key combination you use in a lot of different applications such as Word, Excel, etc. So I'm going to click remove now. Okay, and you see that those Peter Ramirez access control entries are now gone. And I'm scanning down below. I just want to make sure that there's no other Peter Ramirez entries. I don't see any. So now I can click OK. And if we look back on here on our basic access control list, we don't see Peter Ramirez listed anymore, so he's been removed from this. Okay, and then we click OK. Now, if we were to go back and log on locally to the XP machine as Peter Ramirez, he would not be able to do all the things he was able to do before. He wouldn't be able to create users, delete users, reset passwords right away. This would just be taken away from him. Okay, that wraps up Lab 2. Hope you found this video informative, and we'll see you back here real soon when we start Lab 3 and get into the meat and potatoes of Active Directory and start talking about group policy in Server 2003.